Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for how to successfully navigate the flexible and remote job market with Brie Reynolds. My name is Allison, and I'm an info services librarian at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Barb and Jamie. For more programs to keep you entertained and informed, visit our programs calendar at ahml.info. Our December jobs program, Mastering the Art of the Informational Interview, is on Monday, December 7th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to today's speaker, Brie Reynolds, Career Development Manager at the remote job search service FlexJobs. Brie has been supporting job seekers in the flexible and remote job market for more than 10 years. She holds a master's degree in human resources management and has offered remote job market insights on Good Morning America, NPR, and other national media outlets. Brie, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I am very excited to be here to talk about this topic that it's near and dear to my own life. I've been a remote worker for about 10 years, and in that time have worked for FlexJobs, which is a remote job search website. And we've seen a lot of interesting changes over the last 8 months, to say the least. And one of the things that I like doing the most is helping people figure out how to find remote jobs and how to work this way and learn the ins and outs of this, because in some ways it's very obvious, some of the things that you do if you're working from home or if you're looking for remote jobs, but there are a lot of small differences that I think it's important to know, and that will hopefully make you more successful if you are looking for a job that lets you work from home, or once you become a remote worker, actually doing the job of working from home. So let's go ahead and get started. And I apologize if I shake my camera a little bit. I'm actually in a vacation house right now, and my laptop this is a remote work trick, is propped up on an ironing board. So when I go to change slides, I shake it a little bit sometimes. So apologies for that, but part of remote work is being able to work from wherever you happen to be and making do with the equipment that you have. So here we go. So topics that I'm going to cover today. First, I'll just talk a very little bit about FlexJobs so that you kind of know the background and where I'm coming from. And then I'll dive right into what the remote job market looks like right now. That will include companies hiring, the typical jobs and career fields that we see for remote jobs, and then best practices and tools for remote work, and also things like how to stay safe when you are doing your remote job search, avoiding scams, things like that. And then I'm really interested also to hear your questions at the end about building networks, relationships, kind of doing the work of remote work when you are a remote worker. And I'm going to be saying the words remote work a lot in the next 45 minutes or so bear with me. So just a little bit about FlexJobs. We are a job search website founded back in 2007. So we've been around for a while, but now I guess is probably the heyday of remote work, it seems. We focus on remote work mainly. We also offer other types of flexible jobs, so things that have flexible schedules or part-time professional positions. Essentially, the goal is to help people find any sort of job that better fits their life and their needs, so that they can be both good professionals and good at everything else that you have going on in your life. We've helped over 5 million people since our founding back in 2007. And we have over 55,000 companies on the site that we have vetted. That's kind of one of the big things that FlexJobs does, is we pre-screen every job and company before it gets posted to make sure that we're weeding out those scams that I mentioned. What I'm going to talk to you about today is when you're searching anywhere on the internet or talking to people about remote work, how to do that well and how to be effective at it and stay safe. So it's not a FlexJobs centric presentation, but I just wanted to mention that that's kind of what we are. And I am the career development manager at FlexJobs, which means I work as a career coach. So I talk to people and I run a team of career coaches who talk to people each day and help them with their individual remote job search questions, issues, strategy, that sort of stuff, to really help people find these types of jobs. So before this, I was a college career advisor. And so I've always just loved working with people and figuring out how to help them find work that they enjoy doing and that does it in a way that is good for their lives, whether it's remote or flexible or something like that. All right, so let's talk about some trends that we're seeing in the last 8 months And today is actually the 8-month anniversary of when my area, I'm in the Boston area, when we went into our stay-at-home order. So I guess happy anniversary in some strange way. So it's been 8 total months so far. Remote job listings have increased in that time. And I know at the beginning we were wondering what's going to happen with the remote job market. Is it going to go the way of the rest of the job market where things are sort of drying up, and there really weren't, hiring kind of stopped for a little while, or at least slowed way down. But what we saw actually was the opposite with remote jobs. We've seen an average of 14% increase in remote job listings every month of the pandemic. And so that just tells us that employers have shifted very quickly towards hiring remotely. A lot of these increased remote jobs are coming from traditional brick and mortar companies who have embraced remote work and have found that it's working well for them. And then other of the jobs are coming from traditionally remote companies where they have remote teams already in place. They've been working this way for a long time, and they have just continued to work that way. So it's an interesting mix. I'll talk more specifically about the career fields and companies and things in coming slides. We have also seen a huge jump, and this was in the spring of 2020 versus the spring of 2019. We saw a 50% increase in the number of people searching for remote jobs. So there is more competition. That is definitely something to note. But by coming to a presentation like this, or by watching this, if you're watching the recording, you are setting yourself up to be more effective if you're looking for a remote job, which is great. A lot of the folks that we see that just come and start looking for remote jobs and don't really understand some of the techniques that they can use to be more effective, they're not going to be putting themselves out in the best possible way. And so if you're learning these things and you're able to use those techniques, you can put yourself out there in the best possible way for remote jobs and be successful, which will be the overall goal. So these are the top career fields for remote and flexible jobs. It's based on FlexJobs job posting data. At any given time, we have about 30,000 jobs on the site, and we're always measuring the mix of jobs that we have to see which career fields are hiring, which types of companies, that sort of thing. And so right now, and really for the last, this list stays pretty consistent over the years, not just during the pandemic, but it usually is these same 10 or so career fields. These are really the top career fields for remote work. So you see computer and IT at the top, which usually doesn't surprise anyone. That's kind of the #1 thing people think of. But then we also see some more traditional fields too. Medical and health is actually a very large field for remote work. Sales, customer service, which is another maybe not surprising one. Education and training, we've definitely seen that increasing in the last 8 months. And then business development, marketing, project management is also one that over the last several years has really started to increase. So these are the top 10. We measure 55 career fields altogether. So if you're looking at this list and you're thinking, there's not anything in this top 10 that I'm particularly interested in, or this doesn't match what I wanted to do, there are 55 plus other career fields that list remote work. So this is not to say that you can only find remote work in these 10 fields. It just means that most of the jobs are posted in these areas, but there are definitely opportunities in other areas as well. So for this slide and for the coming slides, what I would really recommend is you just start thinking about the possibilities for yourself. For some people, you may want to be continuing in the career field that you've been in. For other people, this may be a time to make a career change, or maybe even just a little career pivot if it's not an entire change. So just be thinking about what are some of the options that are out there, and what does that mean for you, and what you would ultimately like to do in your next job or your next career. Okay, so these are some of the most common flexible job titles. And we see, again, that these are pretty consistent over time. So things like accountant, teacher, writer, engineer, customer service representative, sales representative. We tend to see that these are posted most often and have been for many years. But again, this is 20 job titles out of many hundreds or even thousands of job titles that we see. So if there isn't something that really matches what you're looking for here, again, it might take a little bit more research, but there are definitely more opportunities out there. But it is interesting just to see where most of the remote jobs are being posted in these top 20 job areas. And then the last slide that's full of lists is this slide of companies that hire for remote jobs. These are the top companies for remote and flexible jobs. And I keep on adding flexible. our data is majority remote. And so it's remote and then a little bit of flexibility too, but about 80 to 85% of the data that we have, the jobs that we see, the companies that we see are remote types of positions. And so these companies, the reason that I wanted to show this, even though there are thousands of companies that hire for remote jobs, a lot of these big companies, these are big, well-known, well-established, and in some cases, very traditional types of companies. And yet they have embraced remote work over the last 5 to 10 years, and they operate in a large way remotely. A lot of them also have physical locations where people can work. That's one of the most important things to know about the remote job market. Most of the employers that are hiring for remote jobs are existing employers that have physical locations and also hire people to work remotely. So they have some people who work in the office and some people who work at home. So up here, you've got Amazon, United Health Group, CVS Health, Pearson, which is the publishing company, and then things like Thermo Fisher Scientific. All of these companies have brick and mortar physical locations, and then they also hire remotely as well. So it's important to know that most companies operate that way. The fully remote company, which FlexJobs is a fully remote company, we don't have offices anywhere. We all work completely from home. It's a very small percentage of this overall job market. So just something to keep in mind. I think hopefully this opens you up and expands your idea of who may hire you to work remotely, because the odds are, from what we see, it is large, well-known companies that do the bulk of the remote hiring, similar to the overall job market. And then we do see a lot of small and mid-sized companies that do a lot of remote hiring as well. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit about who's doing the hiring and where you might find some opportunities. Okay, so I'm going to go through some ideas here, and it was mentioned at the top of the slides, or the top of the presentation, that these slides will be available for you as a PDF, so you don't have to take furious notes if you don't want to. But what I want to talk about in the next couple slides is where to actually go searching for these types of jobs. The first place is FlexJobs is a membership site, there we go. But we do offer a lot of free and publicly available data and information to help job seekers. So one thing that we offer that's totally open to the public, you don't need to be a member, is our company guide. I mentioned before, we have over 55,000 companies that we have screened and vetted and found that they offer remote work and flexible work and that they're legitimate. That company guide is open to the public. So you can go and look for companies based on the type of job, the career field that they're hiring in, based on their location. You can do an alphabetical search or just a keyword search for companies so that you can find companies that hire this way. What you'll get there is their history of remote job postings and flexible job postings. So you can see the types of jobs that they've hired before that are remote or flexible. You can see the type of flexibility that they're offering. So it might be part-time or full-time, remote, flexible schedule, whatever it is. It's a really good repository just to see, like, what is this company? What do they offer? And we have a lot of really interesting information about each company. So that's a good resource. Also, every year we put out a list of the 100 top companies for remote jobs. Those are the 100 companies that have hired the most people to work remotely in the last year. It comes out every January, so our next list is coming up pretty soon. And you can get that list and just go through and see all the different companies that are hiring, what they have hired for, and get a good idea of some of the companies that really embrace remote work that you could be potentially targeting. I would also recommend that you can go, any company that you're looking at that you're thinking that might be an interesting company to work for, whether you're looking on a site like LinkedIn or a job board, or you just read about a company in the news, something like that. You can go directly to that company's careers page and start to look for clues that they may offer remote or flexible work. Some companies come right out and say it. They will say, we embrace remote work, 50% of our workforce is remote. Other companies don't do that. They kind of hide it a little bit. So you have to look for clues, like if they're talking about work-life balance or flexible work options, or sometimes they'll actually have stories from their employees who are working that way about what it's like and how it's helpful for them and their work-life balance. So you can look for those things. Another thing I would look for is going to any company's press page. And in the last 8 months, have they posted anything about what they're doing hiring-wise? If they're hiring employees to work remotely, if they've shifted their workforce remote, if they plan to do that for the long term, because now what we're starting to see is many more companies coming out and saying that they have actually seen the benefits of remote work over the last 8 months. and they're going to be implementing that going forward, that maybe they'll let people work from home 2 or 3 days a week, or they'll have a certain percentage of their workforce work completely from home. So you're starting to see companies actually put out press releases related to that. So go to that press page and look for that information. See if they've dropped any hints that they may be going remote for the long term. So that's where you can go to the careers pages. You can do a little sleuthing and figuring out what might be offered, what might be being offered. And then another thing I always recommend people do is think of companies that you just interact with in your life, whether at a previous employer, maybe they were a former customer, a vendor, some kind of business partner that you worked with, that you had a really good experience with, or maybe it's a product or a service that you use in your day-to-day life. Check out those companies. You have a connection to those. You have a positive experience with that company, and they very well may be offering a remote or flexible job. So go to those companies, look at their careers pages. And the reason I like to think about that, like the products and services that you use in your everyday life, when you apply to any of their jobs, you have a story to tell them about why you are choosing to seek out their company in particular. And if it's one thing that recruiters and hiring managers like, it is somebody who is not just sending them a form cover letter and a form resume, but somebody who says, I sought out your company for a particular reason. I used your product, I used your service, I had a great experience with partnering with this company at my previous employer. Whatever it might be, you have a story to tell them. You have a connection to make with them that sets you apart from other job seekers. So go ahead and make a list. I'm a huge fan of lists, whether you want to keep it digitally or on paper, but a list of companies that you need to research and see what they're offering and if it's remote or flexible. And then, ask fellow alumni. So this is actually a holdover. I was doing a presentation for a university most recently, but ask alumni at your university or your college that you went to, or any professional associations that you're a member of. Ask those folks where they got their last job or where they're working and what the policies are at those companies for remote work and flexible work, and get some insider information too. Because a lot of companies have internal remote work programs that they don't advertise at all externally. But if you talk to someone who works at a company like that, they can say, oh yeah, my whole team works from home on Thursdays and Fridays, or my team went remote in March and the manager just said, we're not gonna have to go back to the office at all if we don't want to. So you get that kind of insider information that you're not going to find just by searching the internet. So I would definitely recommend talking to people, and not just alumni that you are, from a college or university that you attended, professional associations. Talk to your neighbors at a social distance, at a safe way, but talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, your family, ask them, like, how did you get your last job? What resources were helpful to you? What are the policies at the companies that you've worked at? And just get some insider information that can really help. Okay, so we talked about companies. Now let's talk about where to go for job listings. So there's FlexJobs. I won't say any more about that. What I will say from a career advisor, career coach perspective is I always recommend that people use smaller job sites rather than those huge job boards that have millions of listings. There are some really big job boards out there, and they can be valuable if you utilize them the right way, if you're able to sort and sift through all of those listings. But for most people, it can be really overwhelming when you go to a big job site and they've got millions and millions of listings and you're trying to do your search to narrow things down. If you go to a smaller site that already specializes in something related to what you're looking for, you're going to narrow that significantly. So the time and effort that you spend sifting through job listings, getting your search just right to come back with the jobs that you really want, you're going to spend a lot less time on your actual search and more time, hopefully, preparing your applications. So Skill Crush is a really nice company. They are, I believe, a fully remote company, but they put out a list every year of the 25 best sites for finding remote work. So you can find 25 different websites on there. They release this every year, so they clean it up. They've got current information, and it's 25 websites that are dedicated to helping people find remote work. So if you Google Skill Crush 25 best sites for finding remote work, you'll find that very easily. Proven, another website, has a list of the 100 plus job boards for job seekers and recruiters. That is divided by industry. So if you know that you want to work in marketing or you want to work in sales, you can go to Proven's list, find the best websites for those particular jobs, and then go to those websites. So again, you're helping yourself in the long run by going to these smaller sites. And then Ryan Robinson has this nice list of the 72, it's a very long title, best freelance job websites to get freelance remote work fast. I believe there's a fast in there when you actually go to the list. I recommend this list for even if you're not looking for freelance work in particular, because a lot of the websites listed there are also offering employee jobs. So it's not just for freelancers, but it is geared towards remote search. I know actually one question I saw just pop up that is related to this specific slide. These boards, some of them are membership sites, some of them are free sites. So you have to just look and see when you get to each of the sites what they're for, but the lists themselves are all publicly available. Good question. And that's the other thing too, when you're looking at these sites, if it is a membership site, you want to pay attention to what members get by being a member, and make sure that it's going to be worth it for you too, because you definitely want to allocate your budget and your expenses accordingly in a job search. And so you want to make sure that as a member of one of these sites that you are getting something for that membership. Okay, so I talked about industry and professional associations for finding companies, but also industry and professional associations often have job boards as well. So you can go look for some jobs, and then also you can do a little bit of professional networking on those sites, asking the folks on those sites where they go to get their jobs, how they got their last job, if they know of any companies that are now hiring remotely, that have shifted to remote work, those sorts of things. So I still recommend those for a variety of reasons. And then I'll reiterate it again, ask your friends, your family, your neighbors, your professional network. You got to start talking to people also. And maybe on your next Zoom call with your family or your friends, this is a topic you can bring up. You can say, hey, I'm in the market for a job. Everybody tell me your favorite job search resource. Or tell me if you've come across a site that you really liked for remote jobs or whatever it might be. But you got to start those conversations to get a little bit of insider info. All right. When you're on all of these different websites, if it is not a site that already caters to remote work, if it's just more of a general job board, you want to make sure you're using the right keywords to search. So the keywords that we see most often for remote jobs, and these are the words that the employers are using to list their jobs. Most employers stick with the first three that are all in that orangey red color: telecommute, virtual, or remote. So those are the top ones that you really want to be using when you're doing keyword searches for remote jobs. Virtual, telecommute, those are kind of the big ones. We also, though, see these other more creative phrases. So as you're searching, if you see these, you should know that those are remote specifically. So that's important to note. Things like open nationwide, distributed team, home base, location agnostic is one of my favorite creative ways to say this. So some employers don't just come out and say this is a remote job. They will say it's location agnostic. It's a small percentage, but just so you know, there are some creative ways to say this so that when you're searching, if you see these things, you can know what it means and know that you're on the right track, that you're looking at a remote job. Okay. Let's go to, oh, there we go. Sorry, slide wouldn't advance. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is scams in the remote job market, because this has long been a problem. And probably if, you may have seen these already in your inbox years ago even. I mean, this has been a problem since remote jobs became a thing 20 and 30 years ago. But scammers understand that working from home is something that a lot of people want to do, and that people are searching online for work from home jobs. And so they are taking advantage of that by creating fake work from home jobs that you think you're applying to that are not actually real, and they're just looking for either personal information to steal, personal identity, things like that, bank account numbers, social security, those sorts of things, or to actually get access to your bank accounts or your credit cards and steal from you essentially that way. So I always want to warn people about these sorts of scams. Some of them are very obvious. You may have come across some in your spam box, actually on your inbox, and thought, oh yeah, obviously, like that's a job scam. Clearly that's not real. But some of them are a little more sophisticated. So we like to make sure that people understand the range of scams that are out there. These are some of the warning signs of scams. And a warning sign, if you see one, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're looking at is a scam for sure. But it does mean that you should take a step back, do some more research before you actually start sending this company your application, your personal information. And the more of these warning signs that you see, the more likely it is that you're looking at a scam. do some research. That's the main thing. If you come across one of these signs, do some more research, and I'll show you a couple very simple methods for researching this sort of thing that can help keep you safe and just save you a lot of time and stress. So the first is, if you can't find a company's name at all, or there is a generic email address being used, like a Gmail or a Yahoo Mail, that's one red flag. That's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to look into this a little bit more before I send them my information. If the job description is vague, or there's no job description at all, if they have just decided that they're going to tell you about how easy the job is, or how much money you make, or the perks of working from home, and they don't actually tell you what you're going to be doing, or they say it's a sales representative position or a teaching position, but they don't give you any details about that, that's a big sign that it's a scam. The other thing is, regular remote job listings will give you qualifications, they will give you the requirements, they will tell you how you need to apply. They're very regular, they're the same as a traditional regular sort of job listing. So if you're starting to see these small job listings where there's a vague job description and most of it is focused on the perks for you for taking the job, that's a big red flag. If they are conducting interviews over instant messenger, this is another red flag. Instant messenger meaning online chat, excuse me. That's my alarm saying to go pick my son up from his hybrid learning schedule, which is not happening today, obviously. Yes, most remote companies will be doing their interviews over phone or video. If they're doing something over instant messenger or online chat, like a Google chat or Yahoo chat or Yahoo Messenger, that's what I'm thinking of. Those are, and text also, it's starting to come up a lot more with text interviews. That's a red flag that what you're looking at is a scam. There are some legitimate remote companies that will interview you this way, but very few and far between. And most of them will conduct a real thorough interview if they're a real company. So even though you're on online chat with them, they're going to be asking you some pretty hard-hitting questions. You're going to have to type out your answers. It's going to be a lengthy interview. It's not going to be quick. The scammers are the ones that do very quick interviews. They don't ask you too many questions, and typically they offer you the job very quickly over this instant messenger type of program. So that's the difference there. Most remote companies or companies that hire remotely will do a phone or a video interview. And then we see this thing, these are kind of the most sophisticated scams that we've seen so far, are these copycat companies. So it's a scammer that takes a real well-known large company name like Google or GE or CNBC. Those are some of the ones that have actually been used in these scams. They take their name, they take their logo, they actually create a website that is a fake website that looks just like the real website of the company. And they target you with these work from home job ads that looks like, oh, I'm going to be working for Google, or I might get a chance to work for GE. And that brings a lot of weight with it. When you know the name of the company already, you know their history. And so scammers are counting on that to get people over doing their research and figuring out if this is a real company or not. So I have an example up here of the two different kinds of URLs. So a fake URL and a real URL, that's kind of the main way to tell these copycat companies apart, is to see whether you're on the correct real web address or a fake website. The fake one here is gecareers.com. The real one is ge.com/careers. So it's a small difference, but it is a very important difference in the long run. So you want to make sure that you're on the real website, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Overall, though, with all of these warning signs, when I talk to people who've come across job scams or who've unfortunately been scammed, they will say that there is usually something in the process that raised their alert, that made them think, well, that's unusual, or why is the company behaving that way? Or, boy, there's a lot of grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes in this job listing, or they really offered me that job quickly. Things that really give you pause and make you think, is this something real or is this a scam? Most people say that happens, but they are they move past it quickly and wind up taking the job. So trust that instinct that you might have. If something seems off, it doesn't take too much time to do some extra research to make sure that that you are staying safe and having a real looking at a real company. So there's a couple ways that you can stay safe through a quick search. This takes a few minutes. For the first one is for any company that you are questioning or any job that you're questioning where you think, I've seen some red flags, I'm not sure if this is real or not. If you just open up a new browser, search for that company's name or that job title and the keyword scam. you will come across some different things. If it is a scam that has been reported, you may see local news reports, Better Business Bureau reports. The FBI often puts out warnings for more large-scale scams. And so you'll see these different reports coming up, which can be very helpful to go, oh, okay, well, clearly, this has been reported in a number of different ways. You may also see reports that individuals who have been scammed are leaving on different websites. So you may see posts on LinkedIn, you may see things on different review websites or on a site like Glassdoor. So you get this sense that, okay, I'm seeing some evidence here that other people have come across this and believe it's a scam. Maybe I should walk away from this and just go to the next job listing. The second way that you can tell is if it's one of those companies where it's a really well-known company and you're not quite sure if you're on that real company's page or a scam page that has just been set up to look like the real company, you can open up a new browser again, search for the company's name like GE and the keyword careers. And what you're going to find in the search results is the real careers page. And you can go and compare the web address to the real page and look at the web address that you were on and see if they're the same or if they're different. And if they're different, you're oftentimes at a scam website. So these take just minutes to do. And the more information you have that's really pointing in the direction of a scam, I would say walk away from that job and go on to the next one. It's much easier. You'll have better peace of mind and you'll be less likely to be the victim of a scam like this and more likely to find a real remote job. All right. So once you've actually found the listings, let's say you found a company or a job that you're really interested in, you are ready to apply. How do you actually set yourself apart when you're applying for remote jobs? Well, I've got samples. I've got sample resumes, all sorts of stuff. The first thing I want to talk about, though, are the skills that employers are looking for. So FlexJobs has a sister site. We call it our sister site. It's kind of a separate little website that we started called Remote Co. And Remote Co, it's remote.co, is a website where we interviewed over 140 remote companies and teams. And we asked them, how do you hire? What questions do you ask? What do you like to see in applicants? And one of the big questions we asked was, aside from someone's ability to do the job, what skills do you look for? So let's assume that if you're going for an engineering position, you have the engineering skills. What does the employer want to see to let them know that you're not just a good engineer, you're a good remote engineer. You would be able to do the job remotely. And these are the skills that they tell us they're looking for. And this is almost every company has the same answers. It's really interesting how similar this is across the board, regardless of the industry, the size of the company. Most of them want to see these things. The biggest one is communication. Remote teams and remote companies rely heavily on written and verbal communication. They don't have the luxury most of the time of body language, of seeing someone, and so they rely a lot on written and verbal communication to function. I'll give you some examples. As a manager, I have about 8 people on my team, and I cannot see, as you would in an office, when someone is frustrated, confused, tired, bored. I can't see any of that. And so I rely on my team to be really communicative with me and voice their emotions, their frustrations, whatever it might be, so that I know what's going on and I can help them. So in a remote team, that's incredibly important. You as the individual remote worker, or if you're going for management roles, you have to have great communication skills because you have to do without body language. And you have to make sure that you have that two-way street of communication. So that's really critical, written and verbal. The next is time and task management and the ability to focus. Basically, the ability to keep yourself on track and at work when you're at home. And I can say from being a remote worker for more than 10 years, when you have a project that you don't want to do, your laundry becomes incredibly interesting. All of a sudden, you think, I would rather clean that bathroom, throw in that load of laundry, take the dog for a walk, than do this thing that I know I need to do. So you have to be able to be your own frontline manager and say, nope, stay in your seat and get your work done, or take a very quick walk, clear your head, get back to work. So the ability to focus yourself and to keep yourself on task is really important. Being a proactive questioner, not just with communication, but asking questions specifically when you don't have enough information, or you want to verify that you understand something, or you want to volunteer and say, hey, I have some time, I'd love to help work with that project. You have to be very proactive in that, and not afraid to speak up for yourself, to get the information you need or the next project you want to work on, or in terms of asking for promotions and raises and increased responsibility. You have to be really proactive at that. And then the next thing is being comfortable with technology. It doesn't have to be expert level comfort. So you don't have to know how to troubleshoot every tiny little thing, but you have to be comfortable enough. And one example I think is a good one is if your Wi-Fi goes out, all of a sudden you're without internet, what do? Do you know the next steps to troubleshoot that kind of level of technology? And if you do, that's a really good baseline. I mean, of course, individual jobs have different technology requirements that you're going to need to know, but at a baseline, are you comfortable enough with technology to troubleshoot those basic things? Mainly because there is not oftentimes with remote teams an IT team that can just walk on down and see what's going on with your computer. And so you have to sometimes be that first person for yourself and go restart your modem or plug into the internet or whatever it might be. This next one, growth mindset, this has really come into play. Companies have been asking for this for years, but we've really seen it in the last 8 months, embracing change, embracing learning new things, understanding new things, and embracing quick switches. When you're on a remote team or a remote company, things can change really quickly. You may decide you were using one program to do all of your document sharing, and now you're going to implement this different program, and you have to be very comfortable learning that new thing, changing, and it's a rapider, I don't think that's a word, it's a faster pace of change, I think sometimes on a remote team. So being comfortable with that, showing an employer that you are interested in growing and evolving, and you're one of those constant learners who really enjoys learning new things, that's a really good piece of your application. And then for being familiar with digital communication tools, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So again, these are skills that many of which you probably already have, or you could very easily kind of brush up on it and learn, if you were really thinking about it, learn to do better. And so it's important to figure out where you stand with these skills, which ones you want to improve on, which ones you think you're really strong in, and then start incorporating those into your application materials when you're applying for remote jobs. And I've got samples of that in a couple slides down the line here. So digital communication tools, these I classify under skills you could easily build. So all of the things that I have listed here, these are the things that when we surveyed all of those remote teams and companies, we said, how do you actually communicate? What programs do you use on a daily basis? And they came back with this list. And this is out of over 140 teams, so it's a pretty good list. Most of them use some combination of instant messenger or online chat, video conferencing, file sharing and document collaboration tools, and some kind of virtual office environment. So you're probably looking at this list and maybe you're familiar with some of these. I mean, we're on Zoom today. Maybe you already use Skype with friends and family or something like that. But then there are probably some programs on this list that you are not familiar with. What I would recommend, these are skills that you can easily build. And what I mean by that is they all offer free versions or free trials so that you can test them out. You can go after this, make a little list of yourself, maybe choose one or two from each section, go find that free version and free trial, sign up and start testing them out and start getting familiar with them. Most of them offer really good tutorials either on their own website, or if you go to YouTube and type in beginner Slack tutorial, there's plenty of videos. So this is part of that growth mindset and learning new things and embracing learning. So you can do this, teach yourself these things at a basic level, just enough to know where if you walked into a company and started on day one as an employee at that company, that you could get up to speed pretty quickly. Like let's say that they use Slack every day, the online chat program. You want to learn that sort of program ahead of time at a level that you're comfortable enough walking in as an employee and figuring it out from there. So having that baseline of knowledge is what we're looking for before you start applying, or while you're applying. It doesn't have to be before. So do some homework after this. Find a couple of these programs that you're interested in, try out the tutorials, and learn something new. And then you can start adding them to your resume and your cover letter and your LinkedIn profile, which we will talk about right now. So when you are writing a resume for a remote job, it is very similar to a resume for a traditional job. So there's not like a huge formatting change. There's not something big that you need to do. And I realized I just got out of focus a little bit. There we go. It is very similar to a traditional type of resume, but you're going to want to start highlighting these different things, these different skills that you have on your resume. So there's one thing that I want to ask, first of all, is you can raise your hand if you want to, though I won't be able to see you, but if you have previous remote work experience, that's something that will come in handy. So if you've ever worked remotely, even during this time with the pandemic or before that, worked remotely partially or fully. So it might have been one day a week, or occasionally, maybe when your kids were homesick from school, or you were waiting for your cable to be installed. Any of those situations, if you worked remotely at any time where you were productive and effective, you can count that as remote experience. You have remote work experience. Also, if you've ever gotten a degree or a certification or taken a class online where you were self-directed, self-focused, maybe you did project work with other people in that class or that degree, but you did enough of studying online, you can call that remote experience as well. The key here, when people ask, well, I'm not sure if my remote experience really counts. The question I always pose is, do you have enough? Is there enough from that remote education experience or remote work experience that you have to talk about it in a job interview? So if an employer asks you, so tell me about your experience working remotely, have you done enough from home that you would feel comfortable answering that question? You could say, I worked from home occasionally at my last employer. It amounted to maybe a few days a month. And I was always really effective and felt even more productive when I worked from home. And then they might ask you more specifically, like, oh, what kind of projects did you work on when you were doing that? Or how did you organize yourself? Or what was your home office like? And if you can kind of go into that and have a little bit of a conversation about your experience, that's enough experience. If you were working from home in air quotes, which sometimes I think for a while used to be used as code for taking a mental health day, then you probably don't have enough to talk about in a job interview and probably shouldn't be putting that on your resume. So that's the dividing line. Can you talk about it in an interview for a little bit? If so, it probably counts. There's a few different ways to put that on your resume. I've got even more samples on the next slide. If you have no remote experience or flexible experience to speak of, you've never worked from home, then you want to go back to the skills I was just talking about and talk about how on your resume you have the skills to work remotely, and then talk about your communication, your task management, your time management, and then your technology skills. You can also talk about those. You can learn those new programs or whatever programs you already know, and then put those in your application. So you can definitely, if you have remote work experience, that is great. If you do not have remote work experience, we can work with that. You can use your skills instead. Okay, so here are a few examples of, if you do have previous remote experience, how to actually get that on your resume. So there, you can see the yellow boxes here point out where these people have put it on their resume. The first one, they have it under their date of employment, where typically you would put a location. So normally you might say something like, faculty, Western Governors University, Golden, Colorado, wherever. I'm not actually sure where it's based, but let's just say that. Instead, this person has put fully remote work, meaning they worked from home. And then in that bullet point, they also reiterate that. So they say, optimize outcomes and learning processes for adult learners while working in a virtual university environment. And so they reinforce their remote work in terms of, this was a fully remote location company that I worked for. The second example, this business consultant, I believe this was a freelancer's resume. They have fully remote work underneath their job title because they didn't have an employer. They were a business consultant, they were self-employed. And then they also have their location and their dates of employment, just like you would for any regular job. And then the last one, the acting executive director, they've estimated that they did about 20% remote work. And so this could be, you can estimate yours as well. There's never going to be some sort of test where the employer is going to go back and call your previous employer and say, what percentage of the time was this person working from home? But they may say, like, in a background check, how often did they work remotely or whatever. So you want to be pretty accurate. But this person, they work from home one day a week. So it was very easy for them to put 20% remote work. That's a pretty easy analysis. And then they, did they have in their bullet points? No, this one did not. Oh, yes, they did. So they had, on that second bullet point, they alluded to it a little bit. I would actually recommend that this person say it a little bit more strongly. Manage 25 clinical and admin staff, as well as staff from outside hospice agencies. And so that it sort of signaled to people that they worked with people in person and outside. But I might actually have them do it a little bit more strongly, where they say manage 25 clinical and admin staff on site as well as remotely at outside hospice agencies, if that was the case. So you can really get it in both places, the actual like job title line and then the bullet points. Okay, so here are some examples. I usually recommend that all job seekers have a summary or a profile at the top of their resume that really goes into why they're a good fit for this particular job. And this is where you want to update your resume. So this person on the first example, the summary of qualifications, they talk about their written and verbal communication skills and how they had accurate communication with management, project managers, and local or remote teams. So they're saying, I worked with both. I worked with local on-site teams. I worked with remote teams. That's a nice way to say that as well. The second one, team effectiveness and productivity through communication. So those are some of those key things, productive communication. And then this person in a bullet point actually has 6 years experience working remotely and in flexible office environments. So they're saying specifically, I have 6 years of remote work experience. If you're going to say something broad like that, though, I would definitely recommend that you're talking about mostly remote experience. So when you say you have 6 years experience working remotely, or 2 years or 6 months or whatever it might be, it's got to be mostly remote. It can't just be a little bit, because that really makes it sound like a lot. And then the last one, the summary they have listed, the very last sentence, skilled at team collaboration while working independently in remote environments. Beautiful. You're telling the employer that you can work remotely, that you are a great collaborator in a remote environment. And those are all things that they really want to know. Okay, just a couple more slides here, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So this, I was talking before about having a technology skills section on your resume, and these are some examples of how you can do that. This is an actual dedicated technology skills section. You could combine this with a more broad skills section overall. Most of the time, I recommend people have that summary at the top and a key skills section underneath your summary on your resume. I think adding technology skills to that area at the top of your resume is a little too much information. Employers still want to get to your actual work experience section pretty quickly. So I usually recommend that technology skills specifically go below professional experience, but above education. So your resume would be your name, your contact information, your summary, your key skills, your work experience, your technology skills, and then your education. It depends on your situation. For some people, if you are a software engineer, a developer, a designer, technology skills probably should be right up at the top. And it will be a much more in-depth list. You'll list all sorts of other things. But for your average non-technical type of position, having technology skills a little bit lower is helpful. Also, if you just graduated with a degree, if you're a new grad of some kind in the last year or so, education should probably be closer to the top of your resume. But those are kind of the two main caveats. So you can see here that these folks have your standard technology skills, so Microsoft Office, but also those other remote technology skills, remote communication skills, says the first one, email, phone, video conferencing, and then they list the actual names of the programs. And then the second one has effective when communicating remotely over phone, email, and video chat. That's really nicely said. That sort of thing applies if you've ever worked in an office, but you worked mostly over the phone and email with people who weren't in the office with you. That counts too. You are working away from people. So if you're able to communicate and collaborate, you can definitely put that on there as distance experience. You're working away from other folks. And then the last one, tools used for effective remote work. They're calling it right out. And then they've got the generic type, the video conferencing, and then Skype or Join Me, the brand name of the programs that they are very familiar with. Also, one thing that the first example and the third example do very well is they have a line at the end that says, adapts quickly to new and changing technology. Again, that speaks to that growth mindset and that ability to learn new things. And then the last one has a similar thing at the very end, new tools adopted on a regular basis. So you're just telling employers, I can learn new things, I like to learn new things, and I can do it quickly and independently, which is oftentimes what they want to hear. Okay, so this is the last slide, and then we'll jump into questions. One thing I wanted to bring up, because the pandemic has presented a lot of people with a situation of having a resume gap, a gap in your work experience. If you've been laid off or furloughed, or you've had to step away from work, part-time or full-time, whatever it might be, if there's a gap in your work experience right now, or even in the past, it doesn't have to be pandemic related, what we have been recommending and does seem to work for our remote work coaching clients is actually filling in that gap on your resume by calling it out instead of just having the gap exist and having the employer make assumptions about what happened during that gap, why you left your last position. Was it your choice? Was it the employer's choice? Was it a performance issue? Was it a trust issue? Was it a whatever it might be? Employers start to fill in that gap with all of these assumptions that are not necessarily true. So what you want to do is fill in that gap for them, tell them why it's there very generally. You don't have to give them lots of details, but it just helps them to stop worrying about what the issue might have been, and that maybe it means that you're not going to be a good hire. So there's a few different ways to do this. We have a number of them. The first example is if you had the gap because you went back to school, or even if maybe you were laid off, but then you decided to go back and do some coursework, this works for that too. So you can say completing coursework via virtual platform. If you're doing it online, you want to call that out for sure. You have your dates that gap takes up. And then the second one is for if you are a caregiver. This one can work if you're a caregiver for young children, for elderly parents. An intentional pause to focus on full-time caregiving, excited and energized to return to work. That's one of the big things too. We want employers to know that you're bringing some energy to this. You're enthusiastic, you're excited about this potential job. And I think one of the unfortunate assumptions that employers make about somebody who has taken a break is that they're not excited to get back to work, that they maybe want to stay not working, or maybe they have been out too long and they're not going to have that energy to go to work. All things that are not really necessarily true, but that employers sometimes assume. And so you want to make sure that you are telling them you're excited, you're energized, you're enthusiastic. Well, all these words start with E, but you could pick words that don't start with E as long as they convey that same enthusiasm. The third example, layoff. You can say, give them some context for the layoff. So this person said one of multiple people laid off due to a change in company strategy. So it tells potential employers you weren't the only person. It was a change in company strategy. It wasn't because your department or your team had some kind of failing that you were a part of. And the second bullet, I think, can work for a lot of people in a lot of different situations. Consistently received outstanding performance reviews from leadership, peers, and parted on good terms. So you're saying, I did good work while I was here. The layoff is not a result of my performance. I was a good performer. And you're just kind of allaying that fear that employers might have. The last one is specifically related to the pandemic, but you can use any combination of these that might work for your situation. This one says, break in employment due to global pandemic, proactively pursuing certifications within an online format in QuickBooks 2019. Oh yes, this is the bookkeeper I worked with. So you talk about you break in employment due to global pandemic, and then what are you doing during this time? Have you been, you could also, if you were also acting as a caregiver, you could put that in there. If you've been learning something, you can put that in there. If you've been proactively, independently learning new technology and programs, you can put that in there also. So you're just telling employers, hey, I've been up to stuff. I haven't completely fallen off the map here. And you could also add something about your excitement, your energy. Like I said, you can do a combination of these different things. All right. So let's actually jump. So this is just a quick review, and I know we have a lot of questions, so I will dive into those. So first things first is to just consider your options for flexible work, company potential, job ideas, and get a good sense of what you're actually aiming towards. I think some people know, like, I want to work remotely, and then they'll think, but I don't really care what I do. I could do 3 or 4 different things. I got a lot of different skills. I just know I need to work remotely. And unfortunately, that does not work from a job search perspective. You have to know what you're targeting, because an employer is going to hire you to do a specific job. So you have to tell that employer, I am gunning for this. This is what I want. This is my focus. Even if you have multiple focuses, you want to proactively choose those focuses so that the employer understands you're not just looking for anything as long as it's remote. You are looking for this particular type of job. And then you want to identify your best remote friendly skills and experiences. Put those on your resume, your cover letters, your LinkedIn. Update your application materials, your online profiles. Start interacting with your network. I know I've mentioned it before, but having conversations is a very important part of this. And then start applying for remote jobs. That's one of the key pieces. I think, myself included, a lot of people get stuck in planning mode and they're getting ready and they're preparing. You got to actually put the applications out there at some point. So I always like to put that as the last thing. Don't forget to apply to these jobs. So with that being said, I think that's it for the formal presentation. I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Brie. That was a wonderful presentation, jam-packed with information. We do have a number of questions that have been coming in throughout in the chat, so I am going to start with those, and I'm going to try my best to go in the order that they were received. So the first question we have is actually relating to folks who are outside of the US who are trying to get a remote job. So if you could speak to how often you see that occurring, and if folks who are outside of the United States would want to look at the same search platforms that you had mentioned, like FlexJobs, earlier in your presentation.
That's a great question. So yes, most of the job search sites out there that I mentioned, FlexJobs included, have jobs outside of the US as well as in the US for remote jobs. So you can definitely look at those different job boards, and they will likely have listings for a variety of places around the world. This actually brings up a really good point that location is still very important in a remote job search. So when you're searching on any of these sites, you want to make sure that you're adding your location. So whether you're in a certain state in the US or you are outside of the US in a different country, make sure that you are adding wherever you're going to be working from in your search parameters. The reason is most remote jobs have a location requirement of some kind. Sometimes it's country-based, so an employer is only set up to hire people in a certain country and they're not hiring from multiple countries. That's often the case. And in the US, sometimes it's state-based. So employers are set up to hire in certain states, but not others, even if you're a remote worker. It's usually due to tax and employment laws because an employer in the US has to register in every state where they're going to have employees. And so some employers, just to save the costs and the administration side of things for that, will only hire in certain states so they can kind of keep their focus on those particular states. And countries also. Every country has its own tax and employment laws. So it's really important when you're searching, and for this person internationally, searching with the location that you're going to be working from. Some sites, FlexJobs included, have an option to search for anywhere jobs, which are those unicorn remote jobs that let you work from anywhere. There are some that exist. It's about 5% of all the remote job listings out there are those digital nomad kinds of jobs that would let you work from anywhere. So if that's what you're looking for, make sure you're choosing anywhere, but otherwise make sure you're putting in whatever specific location you're going to be working from.
Excellent, thank you. And you also answered a follow-up question to that question. So
There you
perfect. Go. And you had mentioned Robert Half as being a partner company. Is that actually an employment agency? So would anything that's posted for them actually be a job that they're seeking to fill on behalf of a client?
Yes, that's a great point. So there are a lot of staffing companies that do hire for remote jobs for client companies. Sometimes you will be, let's say Robert Half, for example, sometimes you'll be an employee of Robert Half if it's a temporary type of position. If it's a full-time traditional sort of employee position, you would then be an employee of their client. So they're kind of acting as the recruiter for those other companies. So yeah, we see job postings directly from companies themselves, and then also from these recruiter type companies like Robert Half. Good question.
Awesome. And if you have a company that's asking you for prepayment as a requirement for proceeding in hiring processes, is that a scam?
Usually it is. So if it's a company and they're saying we have a job and we want to offer you the job, but you have to pay us first, or you have to buy a certain software or buy this kit that's going to allow you to work from home from us, that is almost always a scam, or at least a kind of a bogus way, if it's not an outright scam, a bogus way to make some money off of people. If it is the type of like FlexJobs, for example, sometimes there's confusion with that. FlexJobs is a membership site we don't charge people to get a job. That's kind of the big difference. If somebody's charging you to get a job, that's a scam. Our membership includes the job listings themselves, and then also a lot of job search support services. So it's sort of like working with a recruiter. So career coaching and resume writing and all sorts of coaching related support services for people to find these jobs. If it's an employer that is saying you need to give us money for us to employ you, that is a big red flag. It's most likely a scam.
Okay, and somewhat along the same lines, if a company sends you a computer test that you need to take online once you've sent them a resume, is that a normal part of the process? Is that something that you should trust and do?
Yes, as long as there isn't some payment of the computer program. If they're just saying, hey, we need to test your skills in this particular area, or this is the software we use and we want to see how well you would do with it, that's oftentimes done, especially with things like customer service, where you're going to be hired to use this one type of program all day long as an employee of that company. Sometimes they'll do a computer test like that beforehand. That's actually a really good point. Remote jobs, as part of the hiring process, not only are you submitting your resume, your cover letter, you may do phone interviews or video interviews. Oftentimes there is a task associated with the remote job application process where they might ask you to take a quiz on that software, or write this often happens with like press types of positions, PR positions, write a 1-paragraph press release about this subject, just so they can kind of see how you, not only how you do your work, but how you do it remotely and how you communicate with them during that process. It's kind of a test to see how you are as a remote worker. So yeah, it's somewhat common with remote jobs. And as long as there's no money being asked for in order to take that test, then usually it's okay.
That's excellent to know. So as far as certain computer or technology skills, you had mentioned a lot of things that folks will want to be cognizant of when they're applying for remote jobs. But how important is it that folks be familiar with things like social media platforms like Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and so on?
That's a good question. It's really only important if it's going to be a part of your job. So for somebody in marketing, PR, communications, content, those types of positions, those are going to be a big deal. Most of the other types of positions out there, like teacher, accountant, anything that's not really directly related to social media in some way, you don't really need to know those platforms. And so that's an important thing, is that if you're not going for a job that is directly related to social media in some way, don't spend time learning those sorts of things. I would spend more time learning those tools that I listed before. So online messaging, document sharing, those sorts of things.
Great, thank you. So obviously we have a lot of folks who are now at home assisting their children with homeschooling. Yes, so keeping their kids on track, maybe assisting them with homework, sort of being stand-in teachers some of the time too. How can folks integrate that experience into a resume if they're looking for a remote job?
Oh, yes, I love that. So if you, it's kind of similar to a career break section. You wouldn't necessarily call it a career break, but you may call it like remote learning support, something like that, remote learning support. And then you would have a couple bullet points about, for the number of children, the number of different platforms that you had to use, maybe the hours per day that you spent focusing on that. As somebody who's doing that myself, I could definitely see some value there. And just kind of managing schedules, working on a variety of platforms, troubleshooting for sure, working on different devices and screens and things like that. Yeah, I would absolutely, you could put in a couple bullet points just about that, estimate the amount of time that you're spending on that every day or every week. And especially the troubleshooting and the balancing multiple things at the same time, all remotely. I think that could definitely help. And any communication that you have too with specialists or teachers or whoever is on the other end of that, that would be good too.
Awesome. And then here's the age-old question. Does my resume need to be one page if I'm applying for a remote job?
No. So the short answer is no. Typical resumes now, if you have more than, say, 4 or 5 years of experience, you can go on to 2 pages. We usually recommend 2 pages is enough. And it's not just because career coaches like 2 pages, but when we talk to recruiters and hiring managers, they will say that they prefer no more than 2 pages. They just need kind of that length of information to understand you, enough to know whether they want to talk to you more or not. So 2 pages is probably the max, but you can definitely go over 1 page.
Wonderful. And we had a lot of questions coming in when you started talking about how to account for a gap. So I want to address some of those. So for example, what if the gap is 10 years due to illness? How do you convey that to a prospective employer?
Yeah, in that case, it's a little bit different than those shorter gaps for sure. So I would take a look at when that 10-year gap happened. If it is recent, like it's 10 years ago to present, in that case, you may have that still on your resume. You don't want to get too particular about, especially when it's health issues, the reasons for that. Just disclosing that information is not a good idea that early in the process. It may be something that you want to disclose a little bit later, maybe in a job interview once you're there, or the hiring process if you need accommodations or things like that. But at first, it's not really something that we recommend disclosing right away. If there's anything that you've done in that 10-year gap that is skill building, learning new things, volunteering, if you've done anything like that, then you can add that in there. But it really goes back to, and let me put those examples back up on the screen. Wrong way. There we go. Just 1 or 2 very brief bullet points. You could even say something like an intentional pause to focus on full-time caregiving. Pause might not be the right word if it's 10 years. That seems probably longer than a pause, but an intentional break, something like that, to focus on full-time caregiving. You don't have to say who the caregiving was for, but you would just say, excited and energized to return to work, and keep it really brief. And it's one of those things that most of the time employers aren't going to ask more specifically if it's health related, that sort of thing. But just filling it in some way like that with 1 very brief bullet point would probably be what I recommend.
And sort of similarly, in the sense that this might be more than a pause, what if you're someone who has retired and you've been out of work for a long time due to retirement, but you're now looking to get back into remote work?
Yeah. So in that case, and this actually may work for that 10-year gap now too, that I'm thinking of it. If there's anything that you're learning currently, so if you're looking to get back into remote work, you're probably brushing up on computer skills, learning new programs, those sorts of things. That is something you could put in that gap. So on your resume, you would have that gap that kind of fills in and you could even say, a lot of times I've run across this where people retire early. So they were maybe, 55, 50, retired because the opportunity came up, and they're now 70 and they're like, I want to or need to find a job. You could say, took early retirement if that's the case. So you can actually spell that out, that you want employers to understand that retirement for you did not mean the typical retirement age. But in general, I would take that same approach with the bullet points, talk about anything that you've done, and specifically anything you're doing right now to really gear up and to make sure your skills are fresh and up to date. If you're doing any sort of volunteer work, or you are involved in any professional associations, if you are learning new things, it doesn't have to be something that leads to a certificate or a degree of some kind, as long as it's enough to talk about in a job interview. That's kind of the baseline that we go back to. But if you self-taught a computer program, that you can absolutely put that on your resume, as long as you understand the program and you're able to talk about it. So I would focus on that. What have you been doing now? So maybe just a very brief bullet point explaining your return to work, very briefly, not getting into those details of why, unless it's, love this particular change in my industry and want to get back into it because this is so inspiring. If it's, I need to work or something like that, you don't want to say that. But then just talk about anything that you've done that is learning something new, especially technology-wise, for that situation.
That's wonderful. I feel like you've covered a lot of questions that folks had about the gap just in those last 2 minutes. So moving on to sort of a different topic, security concerns when you're working from home. Security in terms of like Wi-Fi. Is Wi-Fi better than a cellular connection? Is there a concern about using certain tools that we're all now using, like Google Drive? Is there better equipment and software than others?
Yes. Okay. So let's see. Let's talk about like Wi-Fi first. Some companies, some employers will have requirements actually for this. When you are looking at customer service types of positions where you're going to be on the phone, I say on the phone, but you're not actually holding it. It would be like a headset like this. But when you're going to be talking to people on a regular basis or maintaining, you need to maintain a really strong connection and not have it go in and out. Most of those jobs require you to be hardwired to the internet and require a certain internet speed. So they'll actually have you test your internet speed, your upload and download speeds, and see what you've got. So that's something to look into if you're looking for a customer service type position or a position like online teaching. If you're going to be doing a lot of video chat with students and things like that, you may need to be hardwired to the internet. So start thinking about that now. How can you get hardwired if you're not already? And it's really just plugging it into your modem or your router. So it's not like a special thing that you need to drill into your house for unless you don't have that set up already. So otherwise, most employers are okay with Wi-Fi, and they may ask, how is your internet connection? Is it strong? But they don't have you test it necessarily. It's kind of an honor system. So you really have to be your own best judge of what your internet service is like, what you're able to do. If you're already streaming videos and doing downloads and stuff, you're probably going to be okay for most remote jobs. And most employers will not have specific requirements. It's really only customer service that gets into that specific type of requirement, and teaching if you're going to be streaming a lot. So other security concerns, most employers will have some kind of secure network for you to plug into, or to log into, I should say, when you're starting work with them. Some employers provide equipment to you. So they'll say, for security reasons, we want you to use this laptop when you're working, and you sign into this secure network. Others let you use your own devices or have you use your own devices, but they'll still have you sign into something when you're going to work. That's kind of their own little bubble. And I am not a technical person, so you can tell the details of that are lost on me. But a lot of companies do use things like Google Drive and Dropbox and those common programs, and they find them to be secure enough. And I know, for example, FlexJobs, we have Google, we use Google Drive, we use Gmail, but it's the business version, and we find the security standards to be strong enough that we feel fairly secure, knock on wood, using those programs. So each employer does it a little bit differently. Most of the time, you're not going to be required to do anything specific unless you are working in a type of job that really needs that constant internet connection. But like I said, it's usually customer service and teaching, those types of positions.
You sort of touched on this in your answer, but how common is it to expect your remote employer to be providing things like equipment and software and maybe stipends for internet and other services?
It is all over the place. There is really no standard. It's kind of like the Wild West. Some companies provide a technology stipend, like you just mentioned. So they won't say you need to have this laptop or this specific equipment. They'll give you a little bit of a budget to go out and buy a new laptop or a new headset, but it's kind of up to you what you buy. Some employers will send you a package and say, here's your laptop, here's your headset, here's your mouse, here's your second monitor, whatever it might be. That's actually a really good thing to talk about in the job interview process, because you might come down to a couple different remote job offers. One of them provides you with a really nice technology stipend, and one of them doesn't give you anything. There are some employers that don't do anything. You bring your own device, you're responsible for your own home office setup, and they don't even provide the funds to upgrade. So that's actually a really good thing to talk about in the job interview process, to get a sense of what are the benefits outside of salary and health insurance and that sort of stuff that may make or break a job offer for you.
Great. How important or not important do you think a LinkedIn profile is for finding remote work?
I think it's pretty important. We look at a lot of different surveys of recruiters and hiring managers just to see how are they behaving and what do they like to see, what do they do. And most surveys find that about 90% of recruiters and hiring managers do a little bit of a Google search of their job applicants while they're researching them. So they'll look at your resume and your cover letter, but then they're also doing a little bit of searching online for you. And if they're doing that search and you have a LinkedIn profile, it's going to be the first thing or one of the first things that pops up. And that helps you reinforce your professional persona with that employer. So I think even just from that perspective, having a very basic LinkedIn profile, you can even mostly copy and paste what you've got on your resume into that profile. It's a really good way just to reinforce to an employer that you understand how to act like a professional on the internet. If you don't have LinkedIn, then other stuff will come up, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever it might be. And you just want to make sure that those things are either very clean so that you don't mind if an employer sees them, or that they are very secure so that people who you're not connected to, directly connected to, can access your profiles and see that info. But I think LinkedIn, for one, is important for that. But then the second reason to be on LinkedIn is because it's a pretty good platform for interacting with your network, for making new contacts. And also LinkedIn Learning is a really valuable resource. And right now they're offering several courses for free that relate to remote work specifically, recovering from a layoff. I actually did a couple courses for LinkedIn Learning a few years ago. And those are the types of courses. It's like building a flexible career, recovering from a layoff, that are free and open to the public right now. So for those sorts of ways to learn new skills online, I think it's a great platform for that as well.
Great. And would you approach the job search differently if you're looking for full-time remote work versus something like freelance or part-time?
Yes, a little bit. So freelance versus full-time, that's kind of the bigger one that I would say you have to approach it a little bit differently. With freelance, you may often, your resume may be structured a little bit differently, the way that you display the client work that you do. You may have individual clients taking up your different work experience sections, or you may combine them all under one thing. It sort of depends on your history. With full-time remote work, you're going to be listing your career history in chronological order, reverse chronological order, so the most recent at the top. So it's a little bit different just in terms of how you structure your documents. With freelance, you may also need like a portfolio or samples of your work, depending on your field. And with regular employee types of work, you most of the time, unless it's a very specific field like that requires them, you don't need that sort of thing. So it is a little bit different. I would do some research on your situation. It's amazing how many articles are written out there for very particular situations, or YouTube videos. So you could research your particular interests and what you're kind of going between, and see, what are the differences for a freelance job search versus a full-time employee job search. There's a lot of good info out there.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to kind of pull some questions together, because I feel like we have a lot of folks sort of thinking along the same vein. As far as flexible work goes, how flexible is flexible work? Do folks need to be looking at the job description for, the remote employer saying it's flexible, but there are actually set hours? Or is flexible like I get to work whenever I want, so long as I fulfill the 8 hours I'm required to fulfill?
This is a wonderful question, because I think a lot of times people go into remote work thinking, if I work from home, I'm in control of everything. I'm in control of my hours, when I work, how I work, where I work from. And it's not as flexible as that usually. There are some remote jobs out there that are fully flexible, meaning you control everything, the hours that you work, which days of the week that you do those hours on, all that sort of stuff. Most remote jobs, though, have some kind of parameters around your schedule. So if we talk about schedule first, some of them have specific hours. So I remember my very first remote job before I joined FlexJobs, I was on a 9 to 6 schedule, and those were my hours. I had to be there. I got an hour for lunch at 12 o'clock, and it was very regimented. And now at FlexJobs, it's the polar opposite. We have flexible schedules at FlexJobs. So we basically, there are certain hours that we have to work when we have team meetings so that we're all there together. And we tend to have overlapping hours to all work together so that we can collaborate spontaneously. We don't have to have a meeting set up every time we want to talk to somebody. But for the most part, outside of those hours, I get to decide when I'm working. And so it really depends on the employer. The job description is a great place to look for those sorts of clues. If it says flexible hours, does it detail that at all? If it says set hours, does it list those set hours? One thing you can do, if you find a company that is giving you some clues, but it's not really crystal clear in the job description, Glassdoor.com is a really helpful resource. You can look up companies on that site and actually see employee reviews of the companies, and they'll talk about things like that, the work from home arrangements. They might even talk about the stipends that you get versus the equipment that you're offered, or if you get nothing. And they may also talk about the scheduling and how flexible or inflexible it was. So Glassdoor.com for company reviews can be very helpful. And then, yeah, I would read the job description and come up with some questions for your interview to say, okay, so what are the hours like? What's expected of somebody in this position? Or how does this team structure its weekly schedule? Is everybody always working at the same time? And then you can get more clues into that. But it's a really good thing to know going into it that not every remote job is a little bit different in that way. And full flexibility is a tiny percentage. Most of them have some requirements around that.
So you had mentioned earlier on the top fields where you see remote job listings, but what if you're someone whose experience does not fall into one of those categories? So you're a chemist or you're a biologist. What are the chances of finding remote work for somebody like that?
Okay, so this is a good question. I mean, they're all good questions. It's an interesting one. So what I would do actually first and foremost is search for that on a remote job search website and see what comes back. Because I think people are sometimes surprised, like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, we have remote pharmacy positions where you're the one on call and talking to people when they call the pharmacy and they have questions about their prescriptions. So, or you're talking to the doctor, you're inputting information into the computer system. So there are ways to change a job like a chemist or a biologist to be remote depending on it. There's an interesting level of creativity happening with remote jobs. So first, I would search for your job, even if you think it can't be remote, just to see what comes back. The other thing is I would think about the skills that you've used in any of those jobs that you really want to continue using. And instead of doing a keyword search for job titles, do a keyword search for skills, because you'll find a lot of different jobs come back that all require those types of skills that you have and that you want to use. So that's kind of the main thing. If you really can't find anything in your field related to remote work, then you want to think about the skills that you are really good in and that you'd like to use going forward, and start searching by those skills to see what other jobs might be available for you that are remote and that would give you that particular flexibility.
Wonderful. So I've been doing a lot of after work Zoom hangouts, and I know folks hang out with their family and friends and maybe even their church congregations using Zoom or other remote platforms. Am I allowed to convert that into some sort of experience that's relevant on a resume for a remote job?
I think so, yeah. I mean, first of all, you have experience using Zoom, so you can definitely just put Zoom in your technology skills section. If you're comfortable enough with it, it can be the sort of thing with these types of platforms, because there are so many personal and professional ways to use them. In a job interview, you could still say, you know, I participate in 3 hours worth of Zoom meetings a week. They happen to be with friends or with my church congregation, but I'm collaborating and communicating. I understand the platform and I'm completely familiar with it. That's totally fair. If it is something like, I know one of the things was the large church congregation, if you're the one who's kind of wrangling everyone on that Zoom and you're helping people in the chat figure out how to turn on their microphone or their video or whatever it might be, if you're kind of like the go-to person in your family group or your friend group for tech support, you can talk about that too, how you're the troubleshooter, you're the person that people look to help out and get everyone set up. I know I'm not a technical person. I don't have like a technology background, but I am the one that my relatives often come to say, hey, how does this work? Can you walk me through this? How do I do this? Because I'm patient and I can communicate well, and I know enough about a bunch of little things to kind of help them through it. And so you can talk about those skills also. You know, if you have that patience, that communication, those are all important skills in a remote environment. So yes, the short answer is yeah, as long as you can figure out how to discuss that in a way that an employer is going to go, oh, okay, I like that, then I think it makes perfect sense.
Great. And we are reaching our time, so I'm just going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
And hopefully if folks do have library related questions that were not answered, please feel free to reach out to the library directly. Obviously, FlexJobs has a website. If you have additional questions about that service, please visit the FlexJobs website. But my last question for you is, what if you really are someone who has no remote experience whatsoever? You've got nothing. And maybe you've been a technology holdout and you refuse to do those Zoom hangouts with your family. How do you convey to a prospective employer that you have the skill set?
I think in that case, it is important to spend some time building that skill set in particular. So I see a lot of people who they'll come into a coaching session and we will talk about where they are. Where are you right now? What is your understanding of things? What do you know? What do you not know? And then we'll make that list of like, okay, if you've been a holdout up until now on things like Zoom or other technology, what are 2 platforms that you can start using to learn, to grow with, to understand, to kind of break that holdout position that you earn. But I think that's the most important thing, is that first you do have to do some skill building. One of the questions that is, I think, related to this is that we often get is, will employers train me to work remotely? And the unfortunate short answer is no. They will train you after you have that baseline. They will train you on their specific way of using a program or their specific way of collaborating on documents. But you have to come with some base level of information. The good news is there are tons of ways to learn these platforms, these programs. I know a lot of local libraries do programming around this or have people on staff who can help. The internet is a wonderful resource once you get a little comfortable and a little familiar, tutorials and things like that. So you have to kind of build that baseline level of knowledge. So that's what I would recommend for that person, is first you get some of those skills and then you can start talking to employers about them.
Great. Well, Brie, thank you so much for your time today. And I hope we got through the majority of folks' questions. Again, feel free to reach out to the library if you have any other questions. I really appreciate the time you've taken to be with us today, Brie, and everyone. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon to learn about remote and flexible jobs. I hope
Thank
everyone has
you.
a wonderful weekend.
Yes, thanks for having me, Allison, and everybody at the library. And thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.